Hello, good afternoon. It's great to see you all. If I could have my mic go on. Good afternoon. It's great to see you all. Can you hear me? Welcome to the Harvard Graduate School of Education and to the Askwith Forum. My name is Fernando Reimers. I'm a member of the faculty here and also a co-chair of the Advanced Leadership Initiative. This forum is a co-sponsor event by the Graduate School of Education and by the Advanced Leadership Initiative. The Ed School's campaign mantra is learn to change the world. Couldn't be more apropos of the topic of our conversation today. It's what we try to do in this small place in Appian Way, try to be of service to students around the world by working with educational institutions and helping those institutions create the kinds of contexts that actually empower young people. And the Advanced Leadership Initiative is an interfaculty initiative in the university, the brainchild of Professor Rosabeth Kanter and Dean Nitin Noria, the business school, and Dean of the college, Rakesh Khurana, who 10 years ago invited a number of faculty from around the university to embark on the audacious idea of developing a program for people who had retired from a primary career and who had the goal of being of service to the public, to building public good, public value. So the topic of our conversation today is empowerment. And I wanted to start and introduce our speaker by reminding you of the fact that today, 10 days actually from today, but 72 years ago, in May 8th, 1945, was the end of World War II. And at the end of World War II, a lot of people look back and ask themselves, how did we allow this to happen exactly? And what were we thinking? And they had a brilliant idea, which was that maybe it made sense for everyone to take responsibility and collaborate in building an order of things that would prevent that kind of human-made tragedy from ever happening again. And the way they decided, meeting in June of 1945 in the San Francisco Opera House to do that, was by drafting a little document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and by creating the United Nations that would set out to create an order that would give us peace and stability. So fast forward to the present. We have not had an equivalent of World War II, although we've had plenty of wars and conflict. But the world faces some instability and plenty of challenges that require all of us to have the same kind of frame of mind and ask ourselves, what are we thinking as we see the fact that temperature on this planet is rising, that violence of all sorts continues to exist, and the real question is, are we unwittingly engaging in what philosopher Hannah Arendt described as the banality of evil, either directly engaging in or allowing to happen under our watch the very conditions that produce this instability. So the notion of empowering young people is about exactly helping the young to develop the competencies that they need to improve the world. And there is no better person to lead us in that conversation than Bill Drayton, who's the chair and the chief executive office of Ashoka, which he founded in 1980, based on the simple but powerful idea that the most powerful force for good in the world is a person, a social entrepreneur, a term that he invented, a person driven by an innovative idea that can help correct a serious global problem. He's one of 3 members of the leadership team of Ashoka, and his responsibilities are the leadership of a new group of entrepreneurs and social financial services, as well as staff the search and marketing functions. He's always been himself a social entrepreneur. He has modeled what he wants for others. And he has a long record of founding organizations and public service, beginning, I just learned, when he was in elementary school, where he created a school newspaper and where he was lucky enough to have teachers and principals who supported him in those undertakings. As a student, later on in college, he founded organizations that range from Yale Legislative Services to founding here at Harvard, Ashoka Table, an interdisciplinary weekly forum that was designed, as I remember, to help students understand how things really work in the world. a very important thing to do in universities that are sometimes not sufficiently engaged with how the world really works and with changing the world. He taught at the Stanford Law School and at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and he was also assistant administrator at the Environmental Protection Agency under the Carter administration, where he launched emissions trading, the basis of the Kyoto Agreements, among other reforms. He's also the chair of 3 other organizations, Youth Venture, Community Greens, and Get America Working. He has won many awards and honors recognizing his good service to the world. In 2005, he was selected as one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report and by Harvard Center for Public Leadership. He was also received the Yale Law School's highest alumni honor and the National Academy of Public Administration National Public Service Award. He was also one of the early MacArthur Fellows for his work, including the founding of Ashoka. He received an MA from Oxford University and his doctoral degree in law from Yale Law School. After he gives us a lecture that is going to frame our discussion, then my colleagues Monica Higgins, Rosabeth Kanter will join me up here in a conversation with Bill. So I want to introduce them now. Rosabeth Kanter is the Ernest Arbuckle Professor at Harvard Business School, where she specializes in strategy, innovation, and leadership for change. She's also the chair and director of the Harvard University Advanced Leadership Initiative, an innovation that helps successful leaders at the top of their professions apply their skills to national and global challenges in their next life stage. And she's the former chief editor of the Harvard Business Review and has been repeatedly named to lists of the 50 most powerful women in the world by the Times of London and the 50 most influential business thinkers in the world. She received her doctorate from the University of Michigan. I should also say that she's one of the most hopeful persons and hope-inspiring persons that I know. I recently had a chance to talk to her over a dinner about the state of the world, which sometimes does not cause me to be very hopeful, and I frankly left that conversation inspired and re-energized. So we're lucky, I don't know if she's here yet, but we're lucky to have her. She'll come later. Oh, she is here. Monica Higgins is a dear colleague here on the faculty and the Kathleen McCartney Professor of Education Leadership at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where her research and teaching focus on the areas of leadership development and organizational change. She studies the effectiveness of senior leadership teams in large urban school districts across the United States and the conditions that enhance organizational learning in public school systems. She served as an appointee for Education Secretary Arne Duncan in the Obama administration from 2009 to 2016 and currently sits on several boards in the nonprofit education field. She additionally teaches as is the co-chair of the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative. She earned her MBA from the Amos Tuck School of Business and her MA in Psychology from Harvard and her PhD in Organizational Behavior from the Business School and Harvard University. And she's also not only a wonderful and kind colleague, but a person for whom it is second nature. One of the reasons I love to collaborate with her is when we plan activities like these and other undertakings, she has a gift for seeing the beauty that exists in the diversity of people. And whenever she has a hand at that, we end up with the most diverse teams that anyone could have constructed. And she just does it. I'm not even sure she's aware of it, but it's a real delight to work with you in that. So with that, please join me in giving Bill Drayton a warm welcome.
Well, it is a pleasure to be home here. So 150 years ago, roughly, the world made a very radical decision. We said that everybody, meaning everybody, must be literate in written language. And think about that. That was a complete break from the past. Why did we do that? Because we needed to do that. We needed people to read instruction manuals, street signs. The world had gotten sufficiently complicated that that's what we needed. This is, whoever put this thing on, it's on too early. Why was this necessary? So here's some facts. From Rome to 1700, there's no growth in average per capita income, from Augustus onward. from 1700 to now, the rate of change is going up exponentially. That's just a fact. And there's a mirror curve going down. The demand for repetition, both of them are exponential. Halfway to now, we had reached a point where society was so complex that we needed everyone to be literate in written language. And what we're saying is that we're another 150 years on and these curves are exponential, and we now need everyone to be a change maker because the game has changed. Everyone is mupping everyone else faster and faster. That's another fact. And to play in that game, you have to have a very different set of skills. So I'm going to come back to those points, but this is, what are the historical forces, and then what are these different skills? But before we get there, I thought I'd make this come alive a little bit. So this is Sarah, who is an Ashoka Fellow from North Africa, and she is dealing with climate change. North Africa is highly threatened. So what does she do? She helps individual farmers, in effect, become change makers. They make decisions about their land, water, energy. What's the best way of doing things? And one of the better ways of doing things, for example, is to bring in acacia trees because they're really good. Their roots go down more or less forever, and they produce gum arabic. So that and a whole series of other changes, the average farmer's income is up by 60%. She's got a couple of 100,000 acacia trees en route to the 2.9 million she intends for Tunisia, and this is beginning to expand out. Now, how did she get the power to do this? Where did this come from? Well, when she was 11, she saw that the 12 and 13-year-old girls in her village were stopping going to school because they thought it was too unsafe to walk that distance. And she said, oh, well, what about a bus? And a couple of years later, the bus was there. And her folks didn't take over, but they encouraged her. And at 15, she became an Ashoka Youth Venturer and started on the journey she's on now. So this is an example of what an Ashoka Fellow is. It's what we mean by getting your power in your teens. This is actually the norm. There's a reason for me showing this to you. The average Ashoka Fellow has changed policy at the national level within 5 years. The patterns in their field, 3/4 and 90% of that independent institutions copy their innovation. So Sarah is part of 3,700 colleagues, one of them sitting right here. This is a very powerful community. There are 3 levels of which you can have impact: direct service, pattern change, and mindset change. So you need all 3. You need someone to set up an organic farm and someone to fund it. But you also need the entrepreneurs who bring the fundamental pattern change and mindset change. So we'll come back to these themes again. But the pattern that you're seeing with Sarah has been at work for some time. And so here's another story. This is Robin Chase, who is the founder of Zipcar. And you can see her in a Zipcar. And you can also see her as a freshman in college, sitting on the floor with a bunch of T-shirts, cogito ergo sum. So she founded the Philosophy Club and got 1/10 of the student body to be paid up members and 1 out of 8 to buy those T-shirts. So this is Drew Billamoria, who's an Ashoka Fellow from Bombay. And when she was 12, she got the servants in her area trained in financial literacy, opening up financial, banking accounts. At 15, her mother was a social worker working in the Parsi community, and what she was seeing, what Drew was seeing in the schools was that half of kids were dropping out because of math and English. Mom, you're not working on the right problem. And so her mom, who gets a lot of credit here, said, well, let me take you over to the Tata Institute and we'll introduce you to some of the faculty. And so Drew goes over at 15 to talk to the faculty, and they say to her, several of them, you should go and talk to this person, Gloria, over here. She's got this new approach to education. Well, Gloria just happens to have been one of the first Ashoka Fellows and has this very radically different approach to education where kids are in charge, et cetera, et cetera. So Drew goes over, they form an alliance. Drew is convinced this is the right thing to do. And her mom says, no, you've got to go and talk to the head of the Parsi community, not me, and she does. Anyway, so it's not a big surprise that a decade or so later, she sets up Childline. Okay, so street kids have a crisis. There's no way of connecting with the service. So what if you had a free hotline? And would have a hotline staffed by street kids who are trained, who will be sympathetic. Well, if a police person mistreats a street kid, a phone call brings trouble, like right away. The pattern changes. Okay, so 5 years later, she's over 100 countries, then 160 countries. A little bit later, she sets up another organization for all kids, financial literacy and power. And that is over 160 countries. Now, I gave you many stories like this, but already, we're not making this up. This is a fundamental pattern. So over 80% of the Ashoka Fellows started something in their teens. And we went to LinkedIn recently and found 360 out of the 440 million stories where people said they had started something in their teens. Now, a lot of that wasn't what we're talking about. It was the Scoutmaster's idea. Okay, but even given that, you compare that group with the overall group, and they're 4 times as likely to be a C-level leader, 4 times as likely to be an entrepreneur, 5 times as likely to be a founder. So the pattern is really, really clear. We're not making this up. This has been going on for some time. The difference is that 300 years on in these curves, we're at a point that everybody needs this, just as much as we 150 years ago said that everyone needs to be literate in written language. Now we're saying, fact, description, if you don't have the skills to be a change maker, you're going to be marginalized. You can't play in this game. I'm going to come back to both these themes, but let me go a little bit deeper into the change in the strategic environment, and then more deeply into what's required. So the old model was you give people a skill, and then they repeat it for life in workplaces with walls that keep you doing that, whether you're a barber or a banker. And that was very efficient as long as things didn't change very much. But those curves, well, this doesn't work anymore. It is absolutely dysfunctional. The idea that you're going to solve the unemployment problem in Africa by giving kids a skill, like it's a parody. It's so dysfunctional. That doesn't work anymore. So let's just see what we've got. And again, I'm describing reality. Everyone is moving, whether you like it or not. You're being bumped by the people around you, and you're bumping them. And the same is true for organizations and systems, and it's faster and faster and broader and broader. We are becoming, people as a whole, like the human brain. We're all connected to one another. are all influenced by all the other pieces. And every time there's a new value-creating opportunity, you create a new team of teams. Just as the brain does, if you decide you're going to be a helicopter pilot, the brain takes care of your left toe and your inner ear, and then you get to focus on that thing that's coming at you. Well, we're moving into that sort of way you organize overall and way every organization has to be. And any organization that doesn't do that is in big trouble. So this could be a religion, it could be a company, and once you recognize that's your new strategic environment, you've got to do 4 things. You've got to hire for change makers. Somehow you've got to take your existing workforce and help them become change makers. That's a big challenge. You've got to organize in this team of teams way. And you got to see what the new strategy is and use that strategy. Again, this is not something that you have a lot of choice about. You can't be in everyone a change maker, religious house or company if you don't have everyone there be a change maker, and if you aren't wired together in ways that allows people to play in this game. If you don't have the change makers, this doesn't work. If you keep the old structure, change makers are going to flee. You can see that all around you. So again, this is just a description. Let me give you a story of a friend who was actually a classmate when I was an undergraduate here. He went back to Chicago and he's built a very successful company with about 5,000 employees. He visited me just socially about 6 months ago, and halfway through dinner he said, for the first time I'm really scared. We could lose the company like that. And his description of the problem, he understood. I have, he said, 10 to 15 people who can look at the world that they're experiencing and see patterns and then think what that could mean for us. Which is to say, I have 4,985 who are blind, which means we are blind. And what he needs, and this is his example, he's got a lot of machinists. He needs machinist B. All right, this guy really likes hockey. All right, so there's a whole world of hockey out here. Teams of teams, literally. And, well, what if they start doing something different with the fans? Oh, maybe that could affect what we do with our customers or how we deal with one another. And it's not just copying, but it's the ability to see patterns and imagine them and put them together in different ways. And then you've got to come back and quickly communicate that and come together with other people and build a new team of teams. And no, you don't have a year to develop this new product. You have a week, maybe 2 weeks. And oh, by the way, you don't get to repeat it for a decade afterwards because the change process is going around and the new team is morphing. Now, if you don't have the skills to do that, you're out. My friend, this is one of the reasons I'm disguising the case. He does not want the Machinist Union to know. What he knows is that he is never, ever, ever, ever again going to hire a machinist. He is looking for people who have changemaker skills, and then they can learn this or that. And that's the new reality. And again, these are facts. He is very unusual in that he sees it. And now that he's able to use our language, it's much clearer. So, given that that's reality, what's required in growing up now? And we're being very careful, incidentally, to use the phrase growing up, not education, because education is so captured by the traditional. We all went through it for 20 or so years, and it's all in our heads. But think about growing up as a more open phrase. So we think there are 2 absolutely essential things because children are different from young people. Young children must master cognitive empathy-based living for the good of all. We all want to live for the good of all. We all want to express love and respect. Everyone in this room has the skills to do that. If you don't have the skills, you're really, really in big trouble. Now, if I were to look at Fernando and he was looking really sad, if all I had, we were all born with mirror neurons and cerebral cortexes, but if they aren't connected in very sophisticated ways, when I look at Fernando looking sad, I can't help. I'm going to feel sad because my mirror neurons go off, the same place light up in my head as his. However, if those two parts of my brain were brought together, and in ways that I understood this increasingly complex world, a kaleidoscope of context. You know, in the 60s or 70s, most people had one job and one religious house, and maybe they went to a sporting club. And it was pretty simple. Forget that. Now you have to, if I'm going to understand why Fernando is looking sad, I've got to understand those contexts. So the cerebral cortex and mirror neurons have to work together. If I have that, then we all want to help other people. That's what makes us feel really good, live longer. The prophets told us, scientists tell us that. If you don't have the skills, you can't do it. Now, if I look at Fernando and I know I can help him, that's what I'm doing. I do not have the bad places lighting up. I have very happy, long life sort of places because I'm doing something, I'm giving. I have the ability to do that. Now, this is really quite fundamental. Remember that first curve going up, the rate of change? Well, as that curve goes up, the rules cover less and less. And as you don't have 5 contacts, you have this kaleidoscope, they cover less and less. So this is the first generation ever where at least some people cannot. Nobody now can be a good person, can get by diligently following the rules. It just doesn't work. If that's what you're trying to do, you're going to hurt other people, you're going to disrupt groups, and you're gone. If you hurt me, I don't care if you're the best astrophysicist in the world. I want you out of my life, and it's your fault, and anyone who looks like you, I'm not so sure I want to test dealing with that. We can see that going all around. Prejudice is going up, not down, and for this reason, in much of the world. So this is the first skill. Every child must master cognitive empathy-based living for the good of all. If they can't, they're out. How many elementary school principals do you know that they're failing if they have one second grader who hasn't grasped this skill? They're not graded on that. They're graded on whether or not information is getting across, and you can't have mayhem in the hallways, i.e. ruliness. Like there's a total disconnect here. This is why it's like the moment when we said there is a need for everyone to be literate. Now we're saying there's an absolute essential need for everyone to have these skills. Right, the second set of skills, the brain rewires, and you've got a young person, you know, confirmation, bar mitzvahs, the sacred thread ceremony. We used to recognize that was pretty important. Well, young people are totally capable of being change makers, and they need to do that. The only way you can be a change maker is to be it. And all the stories I told you were stories of people who, for one reason or another, their parents, they went to a very unusual school, they became change makers at 12 or 15, and they had it for life. Now, what we have to do is make that not an exception where very few kids somehow squeak through. And the kids of elite families that go to elite schools, you know, my parents were, they kept asking me, well, how do you think so-and-so felt when you did that? And, well, they were, in effect, connecting neurons and cerebral cortex because they thought this was important. Thank God. That was an incredible gift. Well, now we just have to make sure this is for everybody. Everybody. One of the things that's going on all across the world is we have hundreds of millions of people who are falling off the edge of human society because they don't see the new game. They have no idea what they need to do to play in the game, and they correctly feel that they're being pushed off, and there isn't much future for the kids. So those guys working for my friend, they are probably the sons of machinists, but their sons aren't going to be. And they sort of know that, but what is going to come next? Well, this is pretty scary. For people in this room, it's just hard to imagine what this is like. It's terrible. And it gets worse every year as the rate of change goes up. It's just that's reality. So getting across, this is the new game, and every child, every young person must be a change maker, is totally critical. So measures are very important. And then we think there are two critical measures, and these are measures of framework change. The measures I showed you earlier were measures of pattern change. So the most critical measure is what proportion of 12-year-olds or 17-year-olds know, mindset, verb, that they're a change maker. And you can't know if you haven't done it. You can't know if you don't have the skills, haven't started building the skills. That's very fundamental. The second is what proportion of the stakeholders in a school or a youth program or a workplace that has a lot of young people knows that they have a successful or failing program, depending on whether or not it's an everyone a change maker culture. Whether it is the norm for everyone to be a change maker, for the whole culture to be like what the world is becoming, completely unlike the traditional school. So let me share with you a story of a 12-year-old, now probably 13 or 14, from not far from here, Shirley, Mass. Shirley is not an elite place. It is somewhat depressed, actually. So Ashoka has opportunities for young people who've had a dream, built a team, come together. So we had about 350 of these very powerful young people at Georgetown's Mount Vernon campus, like over, sit down at lunch, 6-person table. This very tiny young woman comes down and sits to my right. She introduces herself and very quickly says, I'm 12, because she's sick of people thinking she's 8. And so I ask her the obvious question, well, what's your venture? Well, my brother is autistic, and all through school, I would cry when he was mistreated. But now we fixed that. Well, how did you do that? Well, we get together whenever we see a special student not being treated well, and we figure out what to do, and then we go and do it, and we're very persistent. Now, that's 90% her words. That was her gesture. I find this very moving. This woman has her power. She's never going to be afraid of anything. She has it. She is a change maker. She knows it. She's brought a whole bunch of kids along with her. Now, I asked her one other question. How many student groups are there in Shirley Middle School? She said over 50. Well, I would be astonished if 0.1% of all the middle schools in the world have 50 student groups. What happened there is there was one guy, Phil Growinski, who heard about the youth venture idea, and he had a problem. He saw kids leaving as fast as they graduated. And I'm one of 5 white males over 60 on every committee. Where's the future? And he understood the idea that if you're a change maker, you don't have to move away. And if there's a whole bunch of change makers, you reverse the whole dynamic and become a magnet. So he decided to do that, and he has. And you'll see this in Leominster High School, the schools throughout that's multiple township area. So when she walked into that school, she had a problem. But everyone said here, you had a problem. What you need to do is think of a solution, get together with some other people and make it happen. Look around. That's the norm. That's the way it works. And oh, by the way, come and work with our group and we'll show you how, and listen to our virtual radio station, blah, blah, blah. And her friends. It was a whole community of everyone a change maker. That's the world she's going to live in. Now, how do we get every middle and high school everywhere in the world to be an everyone a change maker culture? I would suggest that is a totally critical test. Is this ed school focused on the right question? Are we really addressing this? This is like literacy. When you started doing it, a lot of people didn't like it. They burned people at the stake for this, vested interests. So I would like to stop, but plant of seeds, if anyone is interested, there is a methodology of how to go about making this happen. And it's at the level of mindset change. Every parent, teacher, principal, young person has to see the new game. Here's what it means for all these different parts of their life, and they can practically do this. And I just give you one example. One of the things that we do for a company or anyone else who wants their existing people to be change makers, get a group together, the manager of the local retail store or bank or a part of the assembly line. I did it with a group of these people from the company, and I was much smaller than anyone else in the room, I can assure you. These people were like this. Well, what do people really care about? Well, 80% of the US workforce is disconnected emotionally from their work, and it's 85% in Europe. What they care about is their kids or their grandkids. And when you say world of change, and look, this is happening, and here's an example, and Alibaba has this giant lending operation. They have no lending officers and no one managing the lending officers, and they're doing better than any of the other lending operations in China. Well, if you think your daughter is going to be a lending officer, forget it. You tell a couple of those things, and then we have a young person, like the young person I just described to you, stand up and tell her story. And they know right away, this is what they want for their daughter. They want their daughter to have a life that she's able to give. That's what makes her happy and healthy. She's going to be wanted. They know that. And then it's pretty simple. What do you do when your 12-year-old comes home and says, no one listens to us? Or the way immigrant kids are treated is awful. You have this incredible opportunity as a parent. I'm really proud of you for seeing that problem. What do you think you can do about it? Oh, that's pretty interesting. Why don't you get your friends together and do it? You can do this, and this is why it's important. This is the key. The school may not understand it, but this is really the key. Now, she probably won't do it right away, but the next time she comes, she's going to be a little bit more ready to come with a problem, and maybe it's the third or fourth time. When she does, you've got one big thing you got to do. Don't take over. Don't let anyone else take over. If you do that, now, she becomes a change maker. If she becomes a change maker, you've become one. And you want the other kids in your family to become one. And the company suddenly has 10% of its employees who are change makers. And they can lead the process of helping others and taking it out to the community. And this is the beginning of the process of how you turn any organization into an everyone a change maker culture. So just a taste. There's so many powerful ways of doing this. And I hope you all will give yourself permission. If you care about a young person, you can help that young person be a change maker. If you have influence on this ed school, for God's sakes, help it focus on this challenge. If you're influential in a church or you know someone who's a writer, you can help in this framework change moment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't you sit here?
Okay.
Right. And then... Well, Bill, thank you very much for this great presentation. We're going to have now a little conversation. We're going to react to what we've heard, maybe ask you some questions, and maybe I can begin. So the notion that everyone needs to be a change maker, you have presented as a need that results from changes in the world, from facts. But I find that the notion is anchored also in normative values, what I would call the values of the Enlightenment, liberal values, the basic values that people are fundamentally equal and that freedom is a good thing. And I think the concept of change maker can be actualized in a setting that is aligned with those values, where there is rule of law, where there is access to information, where there is access to credit, where there are processes to resolve conflict, where we tend to solve those conflicts in nonviolent ways as opposed to having violence, so that we can have trust as opposed to fear. And those values, I think, have been embraced in many societies around the world for a long time, 7 decades at least, since World War II. But I have the sense, and maybe this is the reason for the sadness you perceive, that these values are being challenged in ways they have not been in 7 decades. These fundamental values, that this notion that even this concept is global. I mean, I see behind the notion of Ashoka the concept that humanity is in this together. You have built a global movement. You have built what I would describe as a global citizenship movement. And so the question is, how do you address this normative aspect of the change-maker equation at a time when these values are contested? These fundamental values are contested, because an alternative to having everyone being a change maker, a very democratic idea, is to have enlightened despots, autocrats, that actually rule the lives of most people. And I see that as a real possibility in the world, as a scenario. So make me less sad.
So, yeah.
So you think about the better, what's Pinker's title, the better something of our natures?
Better angels of our
Better
nature.
angels of our natures.
Pinker, yeah.
He points out that this is a long process that's been developing, that we are becoming more able to work together. When Homo sapiens crossed the mouth of the Red Sea, our biggest unit was somewhere between 100 and 150 people. And we now have 2 countries over 1 billion. This country is very large. We have the World Wide Web. We used to tolerate torture pretty much, slavery until pretty recently. These are very powerful forces, and I think they're very much a part of an even deeper historical trend. Well, not deeper than Pinker, but so the first outbreak of everyone a change maker was in the Eastern Mediterranean in classical Greece, and at the same time in North India. And what was happening there was that you had a community of small towns that had democratic town meetings, only for men, etc., but still. And they created scale because there was a community of those polises. So you don't fight during the Olympic Games, etc., etc. And you come to Washington and you see all those Greek temples on the mall. Well, why is that? Because Western civilization was pretty much defined in that really short window. You know, history, tragedy, much worse, geometry. And same thing in North India. Post-Vedic Indian civilization was defined in that same period. And then Philip of Macedon modernized the phalanx, and that was the end of the city-states in Greece, and his son finished everyone else off, and Ashoka's grandfather figured out what that was, and that was the end of the city-states in India, and we lost it, which is why there was no growth from Augustus to the present. Well, we have a second opportunity, which came from a really breakthrough in England. How do you have a much bigger society it isn't dependent on the face-to-face town meeting. The Renaissance tried to recreate that, and it just didn't work. You know, Charles of France and his medieval army, that was the end of Florence. But now we've got something much bigger, and we're building at the global level. And those two curves are very real. People want this. People are hungry for this. You give kids the opportunity to master cognitive empathy, they get it like that. You take a youth community and you make it in everyone a Changemaker community. You could put Captain Queeg in charge and he wouldn't succeed. It's a one-way ratchet. It ties into what people want. Now, are there risks? Yes. I think the biggest risk right now is that we allow a division. I mean, we just suffered an election in which a large part of our society basically said, we're being pushed off the edge. Mm-hmm. Well, how do you deal with that? I think this is why what we say, our goal is everyone, and we really, really, really mean everyone, a changemaker. You can't fudge that. It's not just for us. The class division is between changemakers and not. This is just a 15-year-old black woman who's at another youth venture meeting. She got up after dinner and said, and you could see she just formulated this. I get it. It's not gender, it's not race, it's whether or not you're a changemaker that determines whether you're going to be a success or failure in life. Our job is to make sure that everyone has what it takes to be a change maker. I think it is absolutely criminal that our school system is not doing that. It's absolutely criminal. It's shocking. We know this. It's pretty obvious, but it isn't obvious. So that's why the framework change is so important at the moment. If we can help everyone see that this is the new game, then the rest follows. And I'm very optimistic for another reason. We're pretty convinced we're in the framework change tipping year. So we invented the phrase change maker in the spring of 1981. I was sitting in Bombay trying to think up a title for our first newsletter. And it's been a nice specialist word for decades. In the last 3 years, it's suddenly taken off. If you may remember at the Democratic Convention, Bill Clinton introduces his wife. He kept using the word change maker, and at the end of that, everyone held up a sign, change maker. And it was the lead story in the center, this top middle of the New York Times the next day. What is this word, change maker? Why has this word become suddenly so popular? Because people need it. They're talking about their daughter and their company. They need that word. We're in the tipping process. So if you're thinking about making a commitment to helping this happen, the timing is ripe.
Rosabeth, among the many books you wrote, one of the earliest ones, you talked about empowerment and about structures that empower people, empower women in the corporation. But I think you also have a book called The Changemakers, if I'm not mistaken.
Masters.
Or The Change Masters.
Yeah, voila.
Change Masters. What are your reactions to what you hear Bill say, or what are your reflections?
So first of all, thank you, Fernando, for your humanity and those wonderful introductions and your first question that has to do with values. And thank you, Bill Drayton, for the work you've done and for inspiring us. So I think my job today, so first of all, I do believe in the power of young people, but I also believe in the power of people throughout the life cycle. I believe in the power of institutions, and I think institutions can be very hard to change. And so my job a little bit is to add some complexity, because you make it sound so easy and so simple, let's just make everybody a change maker. Well, what if my change conflicts with your change? What if there are all kinds of people who don't believe that that change is actually going to make a difference? We want to make sure that we're setting kids up for success, but I think we also have to do a little bit more to educate them than simply give them permission to try. I totally believe that. I have dedicated my career to finding the people who start new things. And in fact, that's why I'm associated with the word empowerment way back, associated with the word social entrepreneur. We think at HBS, we kind of created that idea. But how we have to understand why it is that change isn't so easy. And then we can be better at making it happen. Because there are some things individuals can do, and we can certainly exercise that nerve in people. We can certainly give people permission to change things. I believe in what you're saying in another way too, which is that change doesn't occur within the establishment. In fact, we have a phrase at ALI, which I started a few years ago based on an Ed forum with Fernando, which is you have to think outside the building. That education is not the classroom, health is not the hospital, the city isn't City Hall, that it's much broader. But if you're starting from outside the building, with outside the building thinking, there are a lot more tools and awareness that you need to make change than simply the permission you can do it. I agree that the permission is a wonderful starting point. I agree that and applaud your Ashoka fellows, who are often remarkable people. But everybody has some of that in them, and yet we also have to run things that are more repetitive. I do believe that education has to change, not only to be outside the building, but to stress new knowledge as well as received wisdom. And many institutions perpetuate themselves by telling people you have to do it the way it's always been done. And in many of the societies in which Ashoka Changemakers have been effective, they haven't really changed the whole pattern. It's been some individuals that have managed to rise above their circumstances. That's a good starting point. Let's find the people who have the spark, who rise above their circumstances, who start the ball rolling, but let's also understand the much more complex issue of changing institutions. We've seen in the United States how easily things could change back. And Fernando said, I'm very hopeful. I'm just a hopeful person because I always believe there's something that can be done. There's some action that can be taken, but without an understanding of all of the forces that are conspiring to prevent change, it can be very, very difficult. So that's my reaction. Let's take your inspiration and add to it a lot more things in education, whether it's history, literature, whether it's collaboration. You talk about teamwork, but you don't talk about it as resolving the conflict between what my community needs and what your community wants. So we have to surround the idea of change makers with a lot more societal change efforts.
Thank you, Rosabeth. Monica, I think you're now on a hot seat between Bill and Rosabeth.
I am liking this.
But let me explain why.
Spot.
Let me explain why. One of your children, in addition to your three wonderful daughters, is the doctoral program that we created to educate leaders in education here.
Right.
And that program really is trying to produce people who can help us transform the public schools. But Bill said a few times, forget the public schools. They are too easily captured by vested interests. And then he changed a little bit in the end and said, actually, help the schools change the public schools. I was grateful for that. And Rosabeth kind of agreed with that and said, yes, you have to think outside the building. So what are your reactions to that idea? Are the public schools the places in which we can educate the people that Bill is talking about? Or is we better look elsewhere at civic organizations and so on?
So first of all, thank you so much for your comments and the push. I love where I'm sitting. I think it's a perfect spot. And in fact, this book, The Change Masters, I was going to ask about the difference between change makers and change masters, and I now have a question. So this is good. So of course, we have 15,000 districts just in the United States, right? You study the global stage, but we have these institutions, and as Rosabeth said, they are resistant to change. We need them, but they are sticky and they're resistant to change. So some of this work needs to be intrapreneurial, as I see some students in the audience know, right? And so we need to think about change initiatives that maybe have taken hold outside. We bring them into the organization, we change from within, and guess what? Then that spreads and changes the institutions over time. And some of the action needs to be entrepreneurial. And mostly what I heard you talk about were kind of entrepreneurial sorts of endeavors, and that this starts very early stage, and then we can see that continuing on. So I think it's both and, kind of from the outside in and the inside out. Institutions are a factor, big factor in terms of the change process, and so the structures and systems and all of that needs to be contended with, but we can change them, yes we can, but sometimes we need to think very creatively about how to do that. But if I can pivot a little bit then to a question, to thinking about intra and entrepreneurial leadership to, I don't want to use the word sustainability because I think we don't necessarily like that word because we want to continue to be change makers. Is there a difference in your view between starting something afresh, whether it's inside an institution, entrenched institution, or from the outside, and scaling it? So Fernando and I and Jim Honan and Chris Dede and others at the school here, we run an initiative called Scaling for Impact. And so what we're very interested in is not just the early stages, not that that isn't important, the sparking of change and the initiative and so forth, getting off the ground, but we're very interested in once you have a proof point, how do you actually scale that? And I'm wondering for you whether this is kind of, you named some skills, right, for the change makers, and I was kind of putting them in the entrepreneurial kind of tranche, and whether this is a different set of skills that you think folks need in order to actually scale something that started off as either intra or entrepreneurial. Do you view that as kind of a separate kind of change maker or change master? How do you think about that?
So we're trying to be very careful. Entrepreneur and change makers are connected but different.
Okay.
Change makers, we really mean everyone has to be. We're not saying everyone has to be, it's not realistic. More and more people will be, but it's still a minority, are going to bring about fundamental society-wide structural change. But everybody, everyone is being bumped by everyone else faster and faster. You don't have a whole lot of choice. If you're running a dental clinic, your patients are changing, the technology is changing, competitors are coming from all over. The whole model of healthcare is shifting to power in the hands of the patient's family, friends, neighbors, peers, away from the control of a small professional group. Well, I mean, I'm just choosing the dental practice as one of the most apparently mundane. Everyone has to be a change maker. My friend in Chicago isn't going to hire any more machinists. He needs people who has this general skill because he really needs them. So this is a matter of need. Now, I don't think when a young person has the experience that this young woman I've just described to you, the 12-year-old from Shirley, she wasn't just empowered, she learned how to do this. Her team actually worked. They actually intervened to change the behavior of other students. This is very sophisticated, what she's learned. Mm-hmm. She has a goal. She had to build a team. They had to figure out how to intervene. They had to how to intervene successfully, and she's evolved a whole series of other steps, which I spared you from. I don't know what she's going to do. She probably doesn't either. But I know that she's not going to be afraid of a problem. And she has the skills. If she was working for my friend in Chicago, she would see the patterns. And she'd be able to build teams. And she'd be able to see things that are stuck. So this is entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
The idea that there is a wall between people inside an organization outside, it's one of those other crazy things left over. You know, if the machinist sees something in the world of hockey and you build a team, you need someone from the world of hockey who knows how the hell they did this to be part of that team. So, I mean, all these walls have to go away. And in that context, you just have to have these skills. And all across the life cycle, you have to keep getting them. It's not, in the old days, you developed a skill and then you just sit there and repeated it. Well, the level of cognitive empathy skills needed now compared to 1960, it's just dramatically higher. And it's going to get higher next year and the year after. You know, I believe, because we've got 1,000 Ashoka fellows out of the 3,700 focused on kids, and literally 95% of them put kids in charge in absolutely different ways. But math scores go up, language scores go up, in the few places that measure it, bullying rates go down. Now, these people all made these judgments independently. They're in over 90 countries, every type of circumstance. But if you're an entrepreneur, you're only going to succeed if you understand, you at least intuit what the world is going to be like in 20 years. Because otherwise you're on a fool's errand. And entrepreneurs really, really do not want to end up not having their idea be the new pattern. So this is actually a focus group, one of the only focus groups you can really use. Most people have in their heads their life experience. This is not a very good focus group to help you figure out where you're going. 1,000 of the best entrepreneurs who've succeeded in the way I've shown you, these are people who do have a sense of it. And then, so that's one input. The other input is, if you understand what the architecture of an everyone a changemaker world is, like this is not a great mystery. The parts of the world that are doing really well are already organized this way, and they're moving that way faster and faster. These two check one another. This world says we need people who are change makers. All 95% of the fellows saying we're putting kids in charge now. Check. And those are two independent sources. And people want this. This fits their, going to the point of values. There's only, you can't have problems outrun solutions when everyone's a change maker, and we know how to work together, and we're getting better and better at that, and we're building the institutions to do that. The fluid open team of teams. This is, second, it's an inherently more equal world because everyone is powerful. Everyone is a giver. It's not Henry Ford and Bill Taylor sitting there, I'm smarter than you and I'm going to set everything up and you'll do 3 motions for the next 20 years. That is absolutely out. And finally, and I think the most important thing is that everyone in this room has the satisfaction that we can give. We know that. We're able to do it in many different ways. Well, what if you didn't? Imagine what that's like. And it's terrible. It's the worst thing. And people want that. And the only thing that works is if you're doing it for the good of all. Otherwise, if you're powerful and you're not doing it for the good of all, you're a menace. And so once you've made the transition, all the institutions work together to encourage this. So it's like a basketball team. You know, it moves too fast. No one's telling each player what to do, but each player knows all the others. They're each trying to help one another be the best possible basketball player for that play, for the game, for all games. Well, that's the type of world we're headed to, and people want that. They want to be expressing love and respect in action. We just have to give people the skills and make the organizational transitions. At the moment, we're in this very awkward phenomenon that all the old systems are still reinforcing one another. So the cliff is here, but the system keeps going. But more and more pieces are falling out, and some of the smart ones are moving away. So that's part of the tipping process.
I'm feeling the other side of me is liking to respond.
Well, first of all, I think you're preaching to the choir here. That is, I think the premise that in a world of change, a world of open possibilities and high uncertainty, it's very helpful to have the skills to take initiative and make something happen. Also, you're preaching to the choir because 21st century skills is a big theme at the Ed School, and I know that Monica and her students are busily trying to get every public school to understand what 21st century skills are. Once having said that, I guess what I want to know is how do we go on and solve the macro problems of opportunity, of poverty, of health? How do we solve the macro problems of gender discrimination, racial discrimination? How do we make sure that immigrants are effectively integrated into societies? And I think we should absolutely empower more young people inside or outside of the schools. Once having said, I talk about kaleidoscope thinking. It's one of my other big insights, that you connect the pieces differently, you see patterns differently. I think that it would be useful to have 1 million Ashokas. I mean, I think Monica's question about scaling is a really good question, because we can empower people to start, and everybody can start something, but the question is, how do we connect all the things that people are starting for impact? And I would like to know, who are Ashoka's major partners? Who is Ashoka collectively influencing and impacting? Because I believe, and again, applaud and admire, that the individual Ashoka Fellows are doing really great things. So how are you taking that force and working with the right partners so that the big problems in each of those countries get tackled?
Rosabeth, I wonder if I could build on your question while we give Bill time to think about it. I love your reference to how the brain organizes in networks, and your idea that change makers organize themselves in networks. And you didn't say it explicitly, but I think you imagine these networks as not really carrying passports. You see these networks as networks that are global. Now, I believe, and I hope we can agree on that one of the great achievements of humanity in the last century is that we managed to bring 1.2 billion people of school age to school today. We invented that. That didn't exist a century ago. They are in school. I think we can also agree that those schools are not educating most of those children to be change makers. But most of those schools are not under a single jurisdiction. Monica said in the US there are 15,000 different jurisdictions. In some countries they have a national jurisdiction. For large countries in China that doesn't really mean very much. The district means a lot more. So the question is, how do we take this good thing, which are the 60 million teachers who work every day in these institutions, and empower them to be able to produce those change makers? And maybe how do we integrate the network of Ashoka Fellows and others into transforming the institutions that we have? I don't know whether this is helpful or not. I wanted to give you a little bit of...
So thank you. That's the perfect question. Working together, and I mean all of us, I'm not making a wall around Ashoka, but all of us, how do we help the world go through this framework change so that we all know, at all ages and for all purposes, this is the new game. It's a much better game. We need to get there. So one part of it is we've got to redefine what success in growing up is. So parents can behave differently, and kids, and everyone involved. So it's a framework change challenge. And again, direct service, pattern change, framework change, 3 different games played differently with different measures. So for us, I'm just taking this example here of children and young people because this is what the subject is about, but there's a second one. How do we help people see that they've got to organize in fluid open teams of teams, which connects with one of the points you were making. So let me just take this example, and we're learning here. We think that there's a 4-stage process. So the goal is clear. We want everyone to understand that it's really critical for success in growing up that people are able to contribute, they have the power to do that, they're not going to be marginalized, and of course then that they're going to be able to work in societies that have structures that are fluid open teams of teams without walls. But just let me focus over here for a moment. So the stage we're in at the moment is there are 2 major tasks. One is to identify and build alliances with what we call jujitsu partners. So 4 classes: publishers, governments, ed schools, and teachers' unions. Now, in each case, we believe that it is in the central, primary, number 1 strategic interest of those partners to do this. So if, for example, we have 2 or 3 ed schools that decide this is the new paradigm and we are going to be the place that breaks that open. Come and do your PhD here because you're not going to do curlicues on the old system, you're going to do fundamental work on the new one. And oh, by the way, this is a good place to invest because we're on this new thing that the society really needs. You think about teachers' unions. Well, you have a sector that's failing or in deep trouble. Everyone blames everyone else, but a lot of people blame the unions. Those selfish people. And there's some external forces that would like to get rid of the over 40% of union membership that are the teachers and janitors put together. They know they've got that problem. Well, that weakens them in negotiating with school boards. It means the press isn't so great. It means they're vulnerable to political attack, which is going on right now. That's part of reality. The teachers are the face of disempowerment. Kids don't like that. Being disempowered, learning goes down, not up. So when the Ashoka Fellows put kids in charge, the reason math and and language shoots up is kids are very motivated. They're being respected. They're being powerful. Learning. Well, the opposite is going on both of things are terrible for teachers. Teachers want kids to learn, and they'd rather like to not be presented. Now, if you're the union and you say, we are going to be a champion for this new definition of growing up, this is what we are going to do. Now, I can tell you inside the NE, I've just been talking to some of their folks. Their internal polling of teachers show that overwhelmingly teachers are more concerned about the kids than about themselves. Overwhelmingly. And so imagine now the local in Wichita is negotiator, or Cincinnati or wherever, goes to the local school board and says, we want to help the city and the kids make this transformation. Well, they're no longer only in a zero-sum game. They're now working together. And so I was talking to another guy, a 20-year veteran at NEA, and when he envisaged the local union going to the school board to help the school board members kids be ready for a world of change, he just said, oh my God, that could really change the dynamic. So I've given you, the mayor can become governor, etc. So concretely in Brazil, the Ministry of Education the Union of Supervisors, and one of the large ed schools that focuses on the public schools are with us. And that dynamic is beginning to have a very powerful, attractive effect. The ed school is competing on exactly the basis I've been describing. Well, the jujitsu there is you get 2 or 3 ed schools who do that, credible ed schools. Well, we hope that the basis of competition then changes. So I could give you, I mean, I could go into this much more.
This is very helpful.
But, you know, we're in the early awareness tipping stage that leads to the turning point. The next stage, many of you probably saw the film Selma. So, and this is something Gandhi was brilliant about, is that you then produce soap operas that go on for 6 months or whatever with daily episodes. That's what Selma was. You know, your kid has chicken pox and you can't tune in for 5 days, and then you collapse on the couch and you turn it back on, and there's the sheriff. He's still the same jerk he was. And now you've got 5 teachers standing in the rain all day in front of the courthouse. That's your daily episode. And you know, so that's, why is that important? Because when you get to that stage, people really, really need the daily anecdotes. They've got to make 100 decisions about changing language and what are we going to say in conversation. And they don't really want to do that until they've had a safe place they can look for the anecdotes, which is how most people learn. So New York Times coverage of civil rights went up 600% between 60 and 65 because they knew the readers wanted it. And the Gandhian methodology was to provide the soap opera with daily episodes. Now, you have to organize that. So the game of framework change is different from pattern change and very different from direct service. You need all 3. You need the teacher in the classroom. But right now, we've got a framework change game that's really, really important.
This is very helpful, Bill. We're going to turn it over to you, and in your response, in talking about the collective leadership that is necessary to produce change, I hear the echoes of your own engagement with the civil rights movement in this country, which I know as a student you engage in and was very influential in how you see the world. I'm going to ask you to queue behind the mics if you have a question, and I would ask that the question be brief, ends on a question mark, so that we can allocate the remaining 10 minutes to as many different ideas as possible. There are 2 mics on each side of the room. I think you can just get up if you want to ask a question and stand behind one of the mics. And if you could just tell us who you are.
Sure. I'm Sanjay Nandwani. I'm here at the Ed School as a visiting fellow. I thank you for your conversation, but to me, the conversation, even though it's fascinating, seems to be taken from a very US-centric lens, if I may. And I've heard about numeracy and literacy. I'm wondering where civic skills comes in this redefinition of success and growing up. I'm thinking of countries like Colombia, which are actually undergoing, which have only recently signed a peace agreement, and are actually now in a post-conflict phase. I'm thinking of my own country, India, where the middle class might have grown up, but where sons are valued over daughters, where child labor...
I think it's a great question. We get it. Why don't you address it?
So there's no one solution to everything. India still has problems, we have problems, but when you're a change maker and you have the freedom and skills to help others, and those skills are inherently respectful, and you're working to build ways of working with other people. That's universal.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your great remarks today. I'm a little
You can
short. Sorry
just
about
pull that mic out of that base. Yeah.
Great. So I'm Priya Shankar. I'm a medical student out at BU, and I have a question for you about the Ashoka Fellowship, actually. I was curious to know what innate skills, or what are you really looking for when you look for an Ashoka Fellow? And with the fellowship, how do you take that innate talent or curiosity or intellect, whatever it may be, and really help those individuals develop something that's scalable, sustainable, and truly impactful without unintended consequences as well?
Thank you.
So we've refined this methodology, and the results you saw all over the world. The only area that's a little bit different is the Middle East, where we get 29% rather than 55% change national policy within 5 years. So there's got to be a new idea that the person, and we believe, probably will change the pattern in the field, importantly on at least a continental level. So that's a simple knockout. Then creativity in goal setting and problem solving, both. Entrepreneurial quality. Now, we do not mean administrative ability, leadership ability, getting things done. Millions of people do that. But this person cannot come to rest until their idea is the new pattern. Once you understand that, they're in it for as long as it takes. It almost certainly comes out of their whole life history. There's a deep coherence to this. They're listeners. They want to hear anything that isn't going to work, because then they've got to change it. It's an iterative process of creation, listening, more creation. It goes on and on and on. It never stops. And then there is ethical fiber. Now, this is an Indian English phrase you probably recognize, and I think it's the best. The person has to be in it from deep within for the good of all. And this is partly for practical reasons. Entrepreneurs are always in the business of going to people and say, how would you like to do something that you've never heard of, that you're going to be criticized for, that sounds wacky? And you say yes. Well, what happens is that the entrepreneur walks into the room and your radar is on, as it always is, and you say, I trust this person. And then you detect that the person is married to the idea, and therefore you trust the idea. And then you can hear the words. And we can't build a community. The collaborations I was hinting at, that doesn't work. If there's one person in the room that the others know intuitively is not trustworthy, there's no conversation. So that's a simplified, does that do it?
It's great.
Hi, my name is Carlos Alvarado from Beacon Academy, and my question is I'm pretty sure like anyone could answer this, but I feel like throughout the whole discussion, it was a lot of it that had to do with speaking about schools, just talking about schools that don't have many other issues about like funding and all these other things, because I come from a low-income area. And my question is, how does one do the changing that you guys are talking about in an area where there's other driving factors like gang violence and other things that are happening throughout the school while you're trying to do this, all these changes?
Thank you, Carlos.
Does anyone else like to grab this?
I'll tell you. So I think it's very hard. I think people who are working on survival have to work on survival. And however, even within that, the unusual individuals, and it can't be everybody, but unusual individuals, even in the most difficult circumstances, will sometimes rise up and find some small thing they can do. At least, if not changing the entire context, at least to make survival a little bit easier for themselves and for others. And that's why I don't believe that we're actually going to change society just by having people at the grassroots figure out something to do. I think it also is going to take a lot of people who are established figuring out how they're going to help change that institution along with you. And maybe the thing that somebody does at the grassroots is identify, as a student or a kid, identify an adult, an institution, an organization that will help and make them a partner and figure it out together, because I also think it's important not to feel one has to do this all by oneself.
So I'm just going to add on to that. Look for models. So I was trying to see if Stephen Ritz was in the room. We heard from him this morning. There he is. You talk to him, because you're an entrepreneur. You're working in an environment, as you've described to us. He's of the Green Bronx machine in New York, and they're just doing incredible work. So
I realize you
there are
and I
exemplars.
must have been working together for a long time, because Steve's name was also what came to mind.
He's right. I just couldn't see it behind. I'm sorry.
And the reason he
There
came
is.
to mind is
Go talk to
because Steve knows that in every community in the Bronx, there is, like you, believes there is tremendous potential in the students themselves to address those problems. And what he does is to build the processes and the structures to help those students actualize that potential, as you have done in building Ashoka. So we're going to have time for maybe one more question, because we need to end in time. I'm sorry, guys. You got to have the last question.
All right.
If you're really brief, maybe we can do 3, but you need to be really brief.
So, hi, my name is Malia Naily. I go to Beacon Academy, and this is another general question for anybody. So, there are multiple types of groups of people, especially when it comes to being social. So, my question to you guys is, how could somebody who's really introverted, or someone who's really shy and can't really speak up publicly, or they have issues speaking up, how do you expect them to change? How do you expect them to become change makers despite this challenge?
Good. Hold the answer. You should read Professor Kanter's book called Confidence, but hold your answer. We'll come to that. I want you to hear from both of you, and then we'll come back. Yes.
Hi, my name is Mary. I'm a student at Cambridge Engine Latin. From my understanding, this is supposed to be a conversation about how do we make youth as change makers, and mine is about there aren't any youth on this panel.
Well, it depends on how you count.
Yeah.
I feel you. Go ahead. No.
There's also lots in the room.
And so I haven't heard much of y'all challenging the fact that there aren't any young people on this panel.
Right.
So how do you do that? Encouraging other people in this space when there aren't young people on panels about young people and how we empower them to challenge that and enforce that.
Thank you. Let's get the last question, Ana Maria, and then I'm going to ask each of you to pick one of these questions.
Thank you. My name is Ana Maria. I'm a student here at the Ed School, a master's student. My question is about how to empower youth from at-risk communities to be change makers when there are no educational platforms in their communities to support this developmental or social emotional change.
Thank you. Why don't we begin with Rosabeth, Monica, and end with Bill? Is that okay?
Yeah, well, first of all, jokes aside, I think it's a valid point that young people should be represented, and thank goodness you're here, and the Beacon Academy students who are representing the voices of young people. So the gathering does it, but I think that's right. I think the question of how do you empower people in communities that seem to have no resources, it makes me sad to have you feel that way, that there aren't any resources, but I'll bet there are. I think things are never so bleak that there isn't somebody somewhere, whether it's a neighboring community, whether it's an organization concerned about it, whether it's a city council member, whether it's somebody that you can go to and say, why don't we have resources? And that's the start of it. Because I think change making, I can't speak for Bill Drayton, but change making is often sometimes some protesting, starting with asking the questions, not necessarily having a solution. So go for it.
Thanks, Rosabeth. Monica.
Okay, so really quickly, I love that you all are here. We learn from you. You ask great questions. That's how we learn. I love that you used examples and brought us back to our youth and thinking about it. We do have Askwith forums where we have students. I think it's terrific. We should even teach in that way so that we're learning from our students, of course. In terms of the thinking about the confidence piece, I guess, we often think about being a change maker or even just leadership as a solo activity. We need to be a hero, come in, save the day. It's just not the truth of the matter. It's a collective activity. You've got a way of kind of building building relationships with folks who can go after what you're going after. So that would be one thing. And the other thing I would say is just practice. So, practice pitching. I do role plays in my class all the time. It's just practice, practice, practice. Don't wait.
Bill.
So, first of all, I'm an introvert, so I sympathize with this. But one of the wonderful things about encouraging young people to have a dream and build a team, change their world, especially when it's the whole community, is that whatever your interest is, whoever your friends are, you can do it. And there are 50 student groups in Shirley Middle School. It's actually more than that now. That's a community where all the kids are helping one another. There's collective competence, collective confidence. You got a problem, think of an answer, build a team, look around. This is the norm, not the exception. It's not hard, and you do it about your interests as long as you can get some other people who share. This is like the world. It's just, and this is not limited to middle class. The Ashoka Fellows predominantly serve poor people in poor neighborhoods. So Ibrahim Soban in Bangladesh, he puts kids in charge of doing the exercises, grading them, helping one another. Also, from first grade on, for-profit businesses, student-run. Well, this is really powerful. UN measurements, 44% increase in enrollments, dropout rate cut in half. You can do the math of what that does to the average class size. Well, but that's handled because the kids are doing this. Now, I'm just using that as one example. Rural Bangladesh, this is not elite, this is nothing, there's nothing easy, there's not a lot of wealth there. When he got started, 15% of the population was making it into the 5th grade. So that works there. And you give people a chance, they'll go for it.
So I want to thank our 3 panelists for being here today, but I especially want to thank Bill, not only for taking the time to be with us, but for what you have done in taking the Ashoka table concept, which was a place to bring people together to figure out how people really work, and build a much bigger table that is about helping people figure out how to improve the world. And that you have done that. I have met so many Ashoka Fellows, and I'm so grateful that those people do the work they do, and grateful to you that has created a community for them to be recognized, to recognize one another, to know that they're not alone, to do more as the network that you were describing. It's a real gift that you have given the world. And on a personal level, I'm grateful because I used to teach a course here called Education, Poverty, and Inequality, which are themes I care deeply about. But the course had the effect of getting me a little bit down after I would teach it. I would teach this course on a Friday morning and spend Friday afternoon and Saturday overwhelmed by the complexity. And then I read a book that I think you wrote that had a number of these fellows, the woman from Brazil, a number of these Ashoka fellows that were doing remarkable things. And I thought, gee, I'm going to try getting into my course some case studies of people like that. And notice that that segment of the course got me and probably my students a lot happier and more hopeful about those problems. And I said, I'm going to retire the old course and I'm going to replace it with a course I now teach on social innovation. So thank you for that. And thank you not only for what you've done, but for the way in which you've done it, which is gentle and soft-spoken, and it's all about the work and serving people and not about you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.